Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. From his porch perch, Jedediah observed the wagon's trek toward the weather-beaten cabin. Miniature cyclones of dust, like agitated phantoms, swirled around the wheels, echoing the disquiet brewing within him. Since Hemlock's demise, the place had stood vacant, a comforting void in his solitary existence. Now, a rising cloud signaled an unwanted disruption. He narrowed his gaze against the sun, each ray carving deeper lines into his leathery skin. The wagon halted, and a woman descended, her movements measured, laced with fatigue. Slighter than he anticipated, her form was engulfed by a lengthy sable overcoat. A broad-brimmed hat concealed her features, yet Jedediah sensed her appraisal of the property, the listing porch, the rampant weeds, the long-held silence. He knew her identity. Willa Nash, the bereaved. Rumors, like tumbleweeds, had drifted even to his isolated spread tales of Eastern misfortune, a husband's untimely end, a woman seeking solace in the vast, unforgiving West. Jedediah scoffed. The West offered no salvation, only raw realities and the ghosts of shattered aspirations. He was living proof. He remained still, watching as she unloaded the wagon. Crates and bundles emerged, revealing fragments of a life carefully curated and transported. A rocking chair, a stack of hand-stitched quilts, a small, encased portrait briefly held before being tucked away. A flicker of something unfamiliar, a faint resonance of buried pain, stirred within Jedediah. He tightened his jaw, retreating into the cool shadows of his dwelling. The following morning, Jedediah discovered himself drawn to the boundary fence separating his land from the Nash property. He rationalized it as routine upkeep, winter's toll on the posts, but honesty whispered a different motive. He craved a glimpse. He needed to see her. He gathered his implements and began, his motions deliberate and stiff. The hammer's rhythmic clang against the wood punctuated the silence emanating from the cabin. He felt her presence, a subtle current, though unseen. He imagined her within, settling in, clearing out the dust, attempting to transform abandonment into a home. A stray wire snagged his skin, drawing a scarlet bead. He muttered a curse, sucking at the wound. Careless, preoccupied, just as he'd been all those years ago. He shot a glance towards the cabin, half expecting her appearance, but the windows remained dark, inscrutable. He labored for hours, replacing weakened segments, tightening the wire, pointedly averting any gaze toward the house. The sun's heat pressed down, sweat stinging his eyes. It was self-punishment, he understood, for the burgeoning curiosity, for the unwelcome resurgence of emotions he believed extinguished. At last, as dusk painted the sky in fiery hues, casting elongated shadows, he concluded the repairs. He stepped back, surveying his endeavor. The fence a stark demarcation against the twilight landscape, a barrier, both tangible and symbolic, dividing him from her, his history from any future possibility. He gathered his tools, prepared to leave, when a voice drifted to him. "Thank you." He froze, his grip tightening on the hammer's handle. Slowly, he turned, meeting her gaze for the first time. She stood by the fence, outlined against the fading light. The hat still obscured her face, but he noted the gentle slope of her jawline, the delicate curve of her neck. "For the fence," she clarified, her tone soft and melodic, like wind whispering through trees. Jedediah grunted, unsure how to answer. It needed fixing. Still, she responded, it was kind of you. He shrugged, facing away. Just doing what needed doing. He began to depart, but again, she spoke. I'm Willa Nash. He paused, but kept his back turned. Jedediah Blackwood. Silence hung between them, heavy and palpable. He felt her observation, a gentle pressure on his spine. Welcome to the territory, Mrs. Nash, he stated finally, his voice gravelly. Please. Call me Willa, she countered. He offered no reply, resuming his trek toward his home. He sensed her gaze lingering until he disappeared inside. The general store buzzed with hushed pronouncements. Maddie, her steel-gray hair firmly constrained, leaned across the worn counter, her tone barely audible. Did you see her, Martha, the new widow? Arrived quiet as a church mouse yesterday. Martha, a plump woman dusted with flour, nodded with animation. I spotted the wagon. A fancy rig, wouldn't you say? Hardly what one anticipates from someone like her. Precisely, Mattie exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. Rumor has it her husband was a gambler, lost their fortune, died owing a mountain of debts. A gambler, you say? Martha gasped, clutching her ample bosom. And she ventured all the way out here alone? That's not the extent of it, Mattie continued, her voice sinking lower. Certain folks back east whisper. It wasn't merely gambling debts. They hint at something else, something questionable. A younger woman, Sarah, browsing through bolts of fabric, interjected, her brow creased with worry. Questionable? What are you implying? Mattie glanced about, ensuring their privacy. Well, some say her husband may have vanished, and she conveniently inherited everything. Some whisper of foul play. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Murder? Surely not. Well, that's just conjecture naturally, Mattie clarified quickly, but her eyes belied her words. But you know how such tales spread. They always stem from some truth. Martha nodded knowingly. Poor soul. Arriving here with such a shadow looming? I wonder what she is running from. Sarah, however, appeared contemplative. Perhaps she is not fleeing anything. Perhaps she simply seeks renewal. Everyone merits a second chance. Wouldn't you agree? Mattie and Martha exchanged dubious glances. Perhaps, Mattie conceded, but some souls don't deserve such grace. Jedediah entered the store, the bells jingle announcing his presence. The women fell silent, their eyes pivoting to him. He paid them no heed, proceeding directly to the supply shelves. He gathered flour, coffee beans, and a box of nails, his movements concise and efficient. At the counter, he placed his selections down with a dull thud. Mattie rang him up, her expression guarded, yet Jedediah felt her gaze upon him, assessing, probing. Heard you gained a neighbor, Jedediah, she remarked casually, handing him his due. He grunted, claiming the coins. Did you? Willa Nash. Oh, Mattie continued, unfazed. A widow from back east. Jedediah offered no response, turning to depart. They say she bears a burdened past, Mattie called, her voice dripping with insinuation. Jedediah halted, his back to her. His fists clenched, knuckles bone-white. He recognized her game. Stirring up trouble, poisoning the well. He turned slowly, his eyes glacial. Everyone carries a past, Mattie, he said, his tone low and edged with danger. Some are just more adept at keeping it concealed. He exited the store, the silence settling around him like a shroud. He knew the gossip would spread, the whispers intensify. But it mattered little. He had his own demons to face, and he refused to let Maddie and her gossiping kin add to them. As he walked homeward, he glanced toward the Nash place. The cabin sat dark, silent. He wondered if Willa could feel the undercurrent of rumors, if she knew the town's assessment. He wondered if her strength was genuine, or if she was another broken spirit seeking refuge in a land that seldom offered it. He hastened his steps, eager to return to the solace of his ranch. But the image of Willa Nash by the fence, her tone gentle and lilting, lingered. He fought the feeling that their destinies were entwined, and he knew, in his heart, that he could not disregard her. The arrival of the widow next door had irrevocably altered his world. An offering of bread, the aroma of baking clung to Willa as she walked, a comforting cloud against the chill morning air. Sunlight, still low on the horizon, painted the dew-kissed grass in strokes of gold. She held the warm loaf of bread, wrapped in a clean flour sack, like a peace offering. Jedediah's cabin stood stark against the landscape, a testament to a life lived alone. She hesitated for a moment, her resolve wavering against the image of his weathered face, etched with a loneliness that mirrored her own. But she pressed on, driven by a need to connect, to offer something of herself in this isolating land. She found him outside, splitting wood with a practiced, almost violent rhythm. The axe rose and fell with relentless precision, each strike a sharp punctuation mark in the quiet morning. He didn't acknowledge her approach, his focus entirely on the task at hand. The muscles in his back strained against his worn shirt, a silent display of, quote, raw power. Mr. McCrea, Willa said, her voice barely above the sound of the axe. He stopped mid-swing. The axe held aloft for a beat before he slowly lowered it to the chopping block. He turned, his eyes narrowed against the sunlight, assessing her with a gaze that felt both wary and appraising. Mrs. Nash. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Willa stepped closer, the scent of the bread now distinct in the air. I baked some bread. Thought you might like a loaf. She extended her offering, the warmth radiating through the cloth. Jedediah remained still, his arms crossed. He looked at the bread, then back at Willa, his expression unreadable. I don't need charity, ma'am. Willa's smile faltered, but she held her ground. It's not charity, Mr. McCrea. It's neighborliness. Just a simple offering. He studied her face, searching for some hidden motive, some ulterior design. Why? The single word hung in the air, heavy with suspicion. Because, Willa began, her voice gaining strength, a warm meal can make a cold day a little easier. And because we're neighbors. She kept her gaze steady, refusing to be intimidated by his gruff demeanor. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the chirping of birds in the nearby trees. Jedediah's eyes, the color of weathered steel, softened imperceptibly. A flicker of something that might have been vulnerability passed across his face. Gone as quickly as it appeared. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he reached out and took the bread. His fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting, unexpected contact that sent a shiver through Willa. His hand was rough, calloused, quote, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. Thank you, he said, his voice barely audible. You're welcome. Willa's smile returned, tentative but genuine. I hope you enjoy it. He nodded curtly, turning back to the chopping block. He didn't offer to invite her in, didn't offer any further conversation. But as he hefted the axe again, Willa noticed something. He didn't resume his violent rhythm. His movements were slower, more deliberate, as if the simple act of accepting the bread had somehow eased the burden he carried. Willa lingered for a moment, watching him work. She noticed the way the lines around his eyes deepened when he looked down, the almost imperceptible slump in his shoulders. She saw not just a hardened rancher, but a man carrying a deep, unspoken grief, a grief she recognized all too well. "Mr. M.C. Kriya," she said again, her voice softer this time. He paused, but didn't turn around. "Yes? If you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." He remained silent for a long moment. Then, without turning, he said, "I don't need anything from anyone." Willa knew that wasn't true. Everyone needed something. Connection, solace, a helping hand. She just hoped that Jedediah would eventually allow himself to accept it. She turned and walked back towards her cabin. The image of his solitary figure etched in her mind. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The aroma of baking, though fainter now, still clung to her clothes. A reminder of the small act of kindness she had offered. She didn't know if it had made a difference, but she hoped, with a quiet desperation, that it had planted a seed of hope in the barren landscape of Jedediah's heart. As she neared her cabin, she noticed a small, freshly cut bouquet of wildflowers lying on her porch. They were simple blooms, the kind that grew wild along the creek, but they were arranged with a certain care. Willa picked them up, a faint smile playing on her lips. She didn't know who had left them, but she suspected she knew. A silent acknowledgement, a gesture of gratitude, a hint of something more beneath the gruff exterior. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this new land after all. The raging flood, the cerulean sky, moments before a comforting blanket, was now bruised with an unnatural twilight. Plump raindrops, like scattered coins, drummed on the bonny, thirsty ground. A prelude to the sky's watery tantrum. Inside her snug cabin, Willa, mending a rent in her saddle blanket, stilled her hands. A keening wind sliced through the trees, its lament a mirror to her own history of sorrows. Her gaze flickered to the window pane, a prickle of disquiet settling in her stomach. The creek, ordinarily a gossiping brook, was already engorged, its surface a restless froth. Then, a roar erupted, a phantom locomotive thundering through the valley heralding the flash flood's arrival. Heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Willa bolted outside. The creek had breached its confines, a roiling surge of muddy water rampaging across the landscape, devouring everything. Her small vegetable plot, coaxed to life with weeks of patient labor, disappeared without a trace. Closer to the water's edge, outbuildings suffered next, the chicken coop tilting with perilous imbalance. Panic clawed at her throat, but she subdued it, focusing her thoughts. The horses, they needed her, trapped in the lower pasture nearest the swollen creek. As she sprinted toward Cordoran, she glimpsed Jedediah emerging from his own farmhouse, his silhouette stark against the churning brown water. He hurried toward his barn, his movements tight with purpose, his expression a mask of worry, their eyes looked across the watery divide, a silent acknowledgement of the imminent catastrophe. There was no time for words, only a shared understanding. Willa reached the pasture fence, the flood already licking at her ankles. The horses, sensing the danger, huddled together, their eyes reflecting wild fear. She wrestled the gate open, shouting and waving her arms to urge them to higher ground. Hesitant, bewildered, they finally stampeded forward, their hooves pounding a desperate tattoo as they fled the rising tide. Turning back, Willa saw Jedediah battling to corral his cattle. The current's strength was immense. The animals were frantic, and he was fighting a losing battle. With no hesitation, Willa waded into the icy torrent, the shock stealing her breath. She reached Jedediah's side, seizing the rope tethered to a struggling cow. Together, they wrestled the beast toward safety, then plunged back into the fray to save another. They worked in unison, their movements becoming a practiced dance, their faces set with resolute lines. The rain lashed down in curtains, blurring their vision and drenching them to the core. The water climbed higher, threatening to swallow all. Most of the cattle were saved, but a few were swept away by the ravenous flood, their mournful cries lost in the deluge's deafening roar. As dust began to paint the ravaged sky, the floodwaters at last began to cede their advance, leaving behind a wasteland of ruin. The landscape was utterly changed, strewn with wreckage and blanketed in silt. Exhausted and drenched, Willa and Jedediah stood side by side, their silence punctuated only by the persistent rain and the distant, distressed calls of livestock. Jedediah broke the stillness, his voice rough with fatigue. "Come on," he said, turning toward his home. "Let's get you inside before you catch your death." Willa paused, then nodded, following him. Inside, the dry warmth offered blessed relief from the relentless cold and wet. Jedediah gestured to a chair close to the hearth. "Sit, sit," he ordered, his tone gruff yet tinged with concern. "I'll fetch you something warm." He retreated to the kitchen, returning moments later with steamy mugs of coffee. Offering one to Willa, he lowered himself into the opposite chair, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. The silence settled between them, no longer awkward, but heavy with shared exhaustion and relief. "Thank you," Willa murmured, shattering the quiet. "For your help." Jedediah shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "You help too," he countered. "Couldn't have managed it alone." He disappeared into the kitchen once more and returned carrying a bowl of stew, setting it between them, along with 2 spoons. "It's not much," he said, "but it's hot." They ate in comfortable silence, the simple stew a welcome balm after the harrowing ordeal. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a quiet respect and a fragile vulnerability. Willa noticed the deep furrows etched around Jedediah's eyes, the profound weariness weighing down his shoulders. He seemed older than she remembered, his grief carved into the very lines of his face. As she ate, her thoughts drifted to her own troubled past, the sorrow and loss that had driven her to seek sanctuary in this remote corner of the West. She had come here to isolate herself, but the flood had revealed the impossibility of solitude. She needed aid. She needed connection. And perhaps, just perhaps, Jedediah did too. When they had finished, Jedediah cleared the table, his movements economical and practiced. He returned to his chair near the fire, his gaze once more lost in the flames. Willa watched him, her heart aching with a strange blend of pity and admiration. He was a damaged man, hardened by loss, yet beneath the rough exterior, she detected a glimmer of hope, a yearning for companionship. "Jedediah," she said softly, breaking the silence yet again. "Why did you come here?" He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes glued to the dancing firelight. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "Same reason as you, I expect," he confessed. "To get away." He paused, then turned to meet her gaze, his eyes filled with a raw, disarming honesty. "But you can't outrun the past, can you?" he asked. "It has a way of catching up." Willa nodded, her own ghosts swirling in her mind. "No," she admitted. "I suppose you can't." The fire crackled merrily, casting flickering patterns across their faces, a silent testament to their shared grief and the tentative flicker of hope in the enveloping darkness. Whispers of the past dust. Devils danced across the main street of redemption as a brightly painted wagon pulled up in front of Maddie's general store. The words, "Supplies for every need," were emblazoned on its side in swirling gold letters, and the driver, a stout man with a waxed mustache and a booming laugh, hopped down with an agility that belied his size. "Maddie, my dear, you haven't aged a day," he bellowed, sweeping the startled woman into a hug. Maddie, usually unflappable, flushed crimson. "Ezra, what brings you all the way out here?" she asked, trying to smooth down her apron. "Business, my sweet. Pure business. And a little bit of pleasure, of course. Heard tell you had a new face in town." Ezra winked, his gaze drifting towards Willa, who was selecting flour from a nearby barrel. "Widow Nash, isn't it?" Maddie's eyes narrowed slightly. "She is. Came out here looking for a fresh start. Poor thing." Ezra lowered his voice, though it still carried easily in the small store. "Fresh start, you say? Interesting. I seem to recall hearing a different story back east. Nash, that name rings a bell. Something about a rather unfortunate accident." Willa stiffened. She pretended to examine the flour more closely, but her ears were burning. The scent of lye soap and dried apples, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. "Accident, you say?" Maddie's voice was a low hum. She leaned closer to Ezra, her curiosity piqued. "Tell me more, Ezra. You know I'm partial to a good tale." Ezra puffed out his chest, clearly enjoying the attention. "Well, let's just say there were questions. Unanswered ones. The kind that tend to follow a body 6 feet under." He tapped the side of his nose conspiratorially. "Wealthy man, that Nash? Died rather suddenly. Left everything to the little lady." Willa gripped the edge of the flour barrel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards and be swallowed by the earth. But she forced herself to remain still, to project an air of calm she certainly didn't feel. Jedediah, who had been browsing the selection of tools near the back of the store, paused. He hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but Ezra's voice was hard to miss. He didn't catch all the words, but the hushed tones and the glances directed at Willa were enough to set his jaw tight. He knew what it was like to be the subject of whispers, to have your past used as a weapon. Maddie, emboldened by Ezra's hints, turned her attention to Willa. She approached her with a practiced smile that Jedediah saw the glint of something sharper in her eyes. "Finding everything you need, dear?" Maddie asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Willa managed a weak smile. "Yes, thank you, Maddie. Just about done." "So, Willa," Maddie continued, her tone casual but probing. "Ezra here was just telling me he thinks he might have known your late husband back east. Small world, isn't it?" Willa's breath caught in her throat. She met Mattie's gaze, her own eyes betraying a flicker of fear. I suppose it is." Said he remembered a bit of a commotion surrounding his passing, Maddie pressed, watching Willa's reaction with undisguised interest. "Tragic accident, wasn't it?" Jedediah stepped forward, his presence filling the small space. "Maddie," he said, his voice low and steady. "Willa's here to buy flour, not to be interrogated about her personal life," Maddie bristled. "Now, Jedediah, no need to get your hackles up, just making conversation." "Some conversations are best left unsaid," Jedediah retorted, his eyes fixed on Maddie's. He turned to Willa, his expression softening. "Are you ready to go?" Willa nodded gratefully, relieved to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the store. She quickly paid for her flour, avoiding Ezra's curious gaze, and followed Jedediah outside. The moment they were on the porch, Willa's composure crumbled. She leaned against one of the support posts, her shoulders shaking. "I shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew it was a mistake." Jedediah placed a hand on her arm, his touch gentle but firm. "What was a mistake, Willa? Coming to redemption, or something else?" She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the empty street. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "It's in the past. It can't hurt me anymore." "The past has a way of catching up with you, Willa," Jedediah said, his voice tinged with a weariness born of his own experiences. "Especially when someone like that salesman starts stirring up trouble." He looked back at the general store, his eyes narrowed. He saw Ezra talking animatedly to Maddie, their heads close together. He knew that whatever Ezra had told Maddie, it wouldn't stay confined within those walls. The whispers had started, and they would spread like wildfire through the small town. He turned back to Willa, his gaze searching her face. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. "But if you're in trouble, Willa, I want to help." Willa looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She saw in his face a genuine concern, a willingness to offer support without judgment. It was a rare and precious thing, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a safe haven in this isolated corner of the West. But the whispers of the past were growing louder, and she knew that her peace, and perhaps her safety, was about to be shattered. The secrets she had tried so hard to bury were threatening to resurface, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face them. A garden of hope, the afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the dust-choked main street of Redemption in hues of amber and rust. Jedediah found himself drawn, not for the first time, to the splash of vibrant color blooming beside Willa Nash's small cabin. Against the backdrop of the harsh, unforgiving landscape, her garden was an anomaly, a defiant declaration of life. Scarlet runners climbed a makeshift trellis, their blossoms a stark contrast to the weathered wood. Emerald leaves of squash plants sprawled across the earth, promising future bounty. Even the air around it seemed different, thick with the sweet scent of herbs and damp soil. He watched her from the far side of the fence, his calloused hand resting on a weathered post. Willa, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, knelt amongst the rows, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tended to a struggling tomato plant. Her movements were gentle, almost reverent, as if she were coaxing life back into it with her touch. There was a quiet grace in her labor, a serene focus that both intrigued and unsettled him. He knew firsthand how the land could break a person, how the relentless sun and unforgiving soil could grind hope into dust. Yet, here she was, coaxing beauty and sustenance from the very earth that had seemed determined to claim everything else. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to her since Ezra's unwelcome arrival. He'd seen the way the salesman's insinuations had darkened her eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. He knew what it was like to be judged, to have the whispers follow you like shadows. He'd lived with it for years. A sudden, almost involuntary impulse seized him. Before he could second-guess himself, he found himself approaching the gate. He cleared his throat, the sound rough in the still air. "Afternoon, Mrs. Nash." Willa startled, her head snapping up. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed her face. "Mr. Stone?" she replied, her voice soft but steady. She rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her worn skirt. Is there something I can help you with? He hesitated, the offer he was about to make feeling awkward on his tongue. He wasn't a man of pleasantries, and offering help was uncharacteristic. I was just admiring your garden, he said, gesturing towards the flourishing plants. It's impressive. A faint smile touched her lips. Thank you. It's been keeping me busy. Looks like it could use some more space, he observed, his gaze sweeping over the confines of the small plot. You've got a green thumb. Seems a shame to limit it. Willa's smile faded slightly. I suppose so. But I don't have the strength to expand it myself. The words were barely out of his mouth before he realized he'd spoken them. I could help with that, he said, the offer hanging in the air between them. If you'd like. He saw the surprise register clearly in her eyes this time. You would? He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, though his pulse quickened slightly. I've got the tools and the time, and I know my way around the soil. He didn't add that he'd also been looking for something to occupy his mind, something to distract him from the gnawing emptiness that had become his constant companion. Willa studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. He met her eyes, refusing to flinch. He saw suspicion there, but also a flicker of something else, gratitude, perhaps. I wouldn't want to impose, she said finally, her voice hesitant. No imposition, he assured her, perhaps a little too quickly. It'd be a good way to put the land to use. After another moment of consideration, she nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Stone. I appreciate that. I really do. A wave of relief washed over him, surprising in its intensity. He hadn't realized how much he wanted her to accept. Good, he said, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. We can start tomorrow. Morning. The next morning, Jedediah arrived before the sun had fully crested the horizon, the cool air still carrying the scent of damp earth and sagebrush. He brought his shovel, pickaxe, and a sturdy wheelbarrow. Willa was already in the garden, weeding a row of beans, her movements graceful and efficient. Morning, Mr. Stone. She greeted him, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Just Jedediah, he corrected her, the informality feeling strange but not unwelcome. And good morning to you, Willa. He set to work immediately, his strong arms making quick work of the hard-packed soil. Willa watched him for a few minutes, then grabbed a hoe and joined him, working alongside him in comfortable silence. The rhythmic clang of metal against earth filled the air, punctuated by the occasional chirping of birds. As they worked, Jedediah found himself relaxing, the tension that had been coiled tight in his shoulders beginning to ease. There was something therapeutic about the physical labor, about the feel of the earth in his hands, and there was something equally soothing about Willa's quiet presence, her steady determination. She didn't pry, didn't ask questions, didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. She simply worked, her focus unwavering. At one point, as they were planting seeds for a new row of carrots, their hands brushed. A jolt of unexpected electricity shot through him, making him flinch slightly. He glanced at Willa, but she didn't seem to notice, her gaze fixed on the small seeds in her palm. He quickly recovered, burying the seeds in the soil, trying to ignore the lingering warmth in his fingertips. They worked for hours, expanding the garden by a considerable margin. By midday, the sun was beating down relentlessly, and sweat dripped from their brows. We should probably stop for now, Willa said, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. I can make us some lemonade. Jedediah straightened up, his muscles aching but feeling strangely invigorated. Sounds good, he said, allowing himself a genuine smile. As they sat on the porch, sipping the cool, tart lemonade, Jedediah looked out over the expanded garden. It was still rough. The soil freshly turned, but he could already see the potential. He could envision rows of vegetables bursting with life, a testament to their shared labor. "Thank you, Jedediah," Willa said softly, breaking the silence. "For your help. It means a lot to me." He turned to her, their eyes meeting. He saw sincerity in her gaze, a genuine appreciation that warmed him from the inside out. "You're welcome, Willa," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Any time." He knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that this was just the beginning. The garden was more than just a patch of land. It was a symbol of hope, a place where they could both find solace and perhaps, eventually, redemption. And as he looked at Willa, her face softened by the afternoon light, he allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel something again. Something he thought he'd buried long ago. Something that felt a lot like hope. Confrontation at the store, the aroma raw of sun-scorched earth and verdant tomato vines enveloped Willa as she stepped into the general store. Saturday's usual quiet was replaced by a lively murmur. Neighbors exchanging weekly news. Flour, sugar, thread-simple necessities imbued with unusual significance lately. Jedediah's unexpected offer concerning the garden had eased a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged. A traveling peddler. Hair plastered back and a smile that lacked sincerity obstructed her path. He leaned against the counter, his voice a syrupy drawl amplified by the store's intimacy. "Well, hello there, little lady. New around here, aren't we?" Willa attempted to move past, but he sidestepped, trapping her. "Just need a few things," she replied, keeping her tone even. His chuckle rasped, like dragging metal across stone. "A pretty blossom like you shouldn't waste time on errands. I'm heading north, got fine silks and ribbons. Could show you a grand old time." His gaze lingered, prickling her skin. Martha, the ample store owner known for her affability, seemed intensely focused on rearranging pickle jars. Other customers feigned fascination with fabric bolts or potato weights. Willa stood alone. "I'm not interested," she stated firmly, finally squeezing past. Clutching a flour sack, her hands trembled. He followed, his voice dropping to a suggestive murmur. "Don't be like that, sweetheart. A lone woman needs company." His fingers grazed her arm. Then Jedediah entered. He moved with a quiet decisiveness that belied his frame. He hadn't planned on visiting the store. But the salesman's wagon, a garish spectacle of painted posies and hollow promises, had disturbed him earlier. An uneasy premonition had grown until he couldn't dismiss it. Witnessing the man's harassment, his expression hardened. Jedediah remained silent, stepping between Willa and the salesman, a taciturn barrier. The store's atmosphere congealed, conversation dwindling to a nervous hush. He towered over the salesman, his face a roadmap of hardship and remorse. His eyes, usually shielded by indifference, burned with a chilling anger. The salesman, initially unfazed, finally seemed to perceive the shift. He looked up at Jedediah, his smile wavering. "Just passing the time with the lady friend." Jedediah's voice, a low rumble, sounded like granite grinding on granite. "She doesn't desire your company." The salesman's attempted laugh fell flat. "No need to get your dander up. Just offering a friendly service." He reached for Jedediah's arm, but found him unyielding. His gaze remained fixed, unwavering. "Leave," Jedediah commanded, his words curt and precise. Finally grasping the depth of the implied threat, the salesman swallowed hard. He scanned the store for support. encountering only averted gazes and tight-lipped disapproval. Martha was suddenly absorbed in polishing the counter with excessive zeal. "All right, all right," he stammered, retreating. "No need for trouble." Snatching his hat, he hurried towards the door, muttering. Jedediah watched him depart, his body coiled, ready to react. Once the salesman disappeared, he turned to Willa. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentler. Willa nodded, her throat constricted. "Thank you, Jedediah. I didn't know what to do." Heat flooded her face, a blend of humiliation and gratitude. He nodded, his gaze sweeping her features for any sign of harm. "He won't trouble you again." He retrieved the flour sack, placing it back in her hands. Silence stretched, punctuated only by creaking floorboards and rustling fabric. The other patrons remained motionless, their eyes flitting between Willa and Jedediah. A palpable unease hung in the air, a blend of curiosity and suspicion. Jedediah's unexpected gallantry had unsettled the entire store. Willa met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion he couldn't decipher. I should go," she whispered. Jedediah stepped aside. "I'll walk you back," he offered, his tone gruff but genuine. She hesitated, then nodded. They exited the store together, the silence thick with unspoken feelings. The townsfolk watched, their faces mirroring surprise and speculation. Jedediah, the recluse, strolling with Willa, the enigmatic widow, a spectacle ripe for gossip. As they walked along the dusty road, Willa broke the silence. "I don't know why you did that, Jedediah, but I'm grateful." He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "He overstepped." "Most men would have looked away," she stated, a hint of bitterness lacing her voice. He stopped, turning to face her. "I'm not most men." The words, simple yet laden, hinted at an untold history, a lingering darkness. She looked at him, truly saw him, beyond the gruff exterior, the haunted eyes, the years of isolation. She saw a man scarred, perhaps, yet still possessing a spark of decency, a glimmer of goodness. "No," she said softly, "I don't think you are." They resumed walking, the silence transformed, lighter, tinged with tentative understanding. Reaching the fence dividing their properties, Willa stopped. "Thank you again, Jedediah," she said sincerely. "For everything." He nodded, his gaze lingering before he turned towards his land. He felt the town's eyes burning into his back, their whispers like persistent shadows. He didn't care. He had acted according to his conscience, and for the first time in years, felt something other than regret. Perhaps against all odds, he wasn't beyond redemption, but as the sun dipped, painting long shadows across the valley, a seed of doubt sprouted. He had defended Willa, stood against the salesman, but what of her secrets? What if her past resurfaced? He had let his guard down, allowed himself to feel. Was he making a fatal error? Back at the general store, Martha watched Jedediah disappear over the ridge. She sighed, drying her hands on, her apron. "Well, I never," she murmured. Jedediah standing up for a woman. Miracles do happen. Emboldened by his departure, the patrons began to murmur. "Something's not right about that woman," one man said. His voice hushed. Arriving with no explanation, no kin. Now Jedediah's her knight in shining armor? Maybe she's got something on him. Another woman offered, her eyes narrowed. Maybe she's not who she claims to be. The whispers grew, louder, more accusatory. Seeds of suspicion had been sown, taking root. Willa's past was becoming the town's obsession. And Jedediah, in defending her, had unknowingly entwined himself in a story far from finished. "Secrets," revealed the sun. A molten hammer pounded the small of their backs as they toiled, dark earth clinging to their skin like a second hide. Jedediah, typically a solitary figure etched against his own lonely panorama, discovered a peculiar comfort in Willa's Kerperd presence, the shared work a wordless communion. He plunged the shovel into the yielding earth, preparing the beds for her burgeoning vegetables, each motion a quiet act of defiance against the isolation that had long defined him. She followed, smoothing the turned soil, her movements still elegant despite the lines of hardship etched upon her face. A chorus of buzzing bees filled the air, drawn to the riot of wildflowers lining the fence, a cheerful counterpoint to the strained quiet that had lingered since the awkward encounter at the mercantile. At last, Willa rested her trowel, wiping her forehead with a weary hand. "Jedediah," she began, her voice a fragile thread, "there's something I must tell you." Her gaze remained fixed on a distant hawk circling in the boundless sky, avoiding his. The digging ceased as he leaned on the shovel's handle, a shiver of premonition snaking down his spine at her posture, that rigid, self-protective stance of someone braced for impact. "What is it, Willa?" he murmured, striving for a calm tone. She drew a ragged breath, the air trembling as it left her. "It's about my late husband, Thomas." The name snagged in her throat, a bitter taste of the life she yearned to escape. Jedediah waited, his pulse a frantic drum against his ribs. He knew so little of her history, merely that she was a widow seeking a clean slate. Respecting her privacy, he hadn't pried, yet he sensed that her past was now reaching out, its claws seeking to drag her back. "Thomas, he wasn't the man I believed him to be," she revealed, her voice cracking like thin ice. Tears welled up, carving glistening trails through the grime on her cheeks. "He was mixed up in things. Dangerous things. Illegal dealings." Jedediah remained silent, absorbing her confession, his mind struggling to reconcile the gentle woman beside him with the image of a woman embroiled in criminal activities. He knew darkness well enough to recognize its subtle signs, the telltale shifts in demeanor that betrayed a hidden weight. "What kind of dealings?" he inquired, his voice a low rumble. He needed to gauge the scope of the threat, the peril they potentially faced. Willa recoiled, the question a physical blow. He ran with a ruthless crew. A gang. They peddled in stolen property, extorted local businesses. Things I preferred not to know. A shiver racked her frame, her eyes wide with remembered dread. "I was ignorant of the full extent when we married. I was young, innocent. He appeared captivating, thrilling. The scales fell from my eyes quickly enough, though." "And you couldn't just leave?" Jedediah pressed, his brow furrowed in concern. "I tried," she whispered, barely audible. "But he refused to let me. He claimed I knew too much, that I was implicated whether I liked it or not." The vision of Willa ensnared, helpless, ignited a slow burn of anger within Jedediah. He understood the feeling of being trapped by circumstance, rendered powerless against overwhelming forces. "After he died," Willa continued, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw my opportunity. I liquidated everything I could, took what little money remained, and fled. I reinvented myself, hoping to vanish, to rebuild. And you believed you had succeeded?" Jedediah questioned, already anticipating her response. She shook her head, tears now cascading freely. "I lived in hope, but deep down, I always knew it was only a matter of time before they tracked me down." "Who, Willa? Who do you fear?" Ah, Jedediah urged, his grip tightening on the shovel. He needed specifics, names, anything tangible to confront. Cain, she breathed, the name a venomous hiss of terror. He was Thomas's second in command. Unrelenting. Vicious. He won't relinquish this. He believes I know the location of some money Thomas concealed. Money they all consider theirs. And do you? Jedediah questioned, his eyes probing hers intently. Willa shook her head with frantic vehemence. No, I swear I don't. I never wanted any association with their dirty money. All I ever wanted was to be free. Jedediah scrutinized her face, searching for any flicker of deceit. He detected only fear, desperation, a raw vulnerability that resonated deeply within him. He believed her. They spotted you at the general store, didn't they? He surmised, his tone hardening. That's why that traveling salesman displayed such interest. Willa nodded, her body trembling uncontrollably. I suspect so. The way he looked at me, a peculiar intensity in his gaze, it was as if he recognized me, even after all this time. Then they're aware of your presence here, Jedediah stated, his voice like tempered steel. They'll be coming. Willa buried her face in her hands, succumbing to sobs. What am I to do? I can't run again. I have nowhere to escape to. Jedediah stepped forward, gently prying her hands from her face. He met her gaze, his own filled with resolute determination. You're not alone in this, Willa, he declared, his voice unwavering. I won't allow them to harm you. His words, simple yet potent, seemed to cut through the fog of her panic. She searched his eyes, hers wide with a fragile mix of hope and disbelief. You would do that for me? He nodded, his gaze unwavering. I would. He couldn't fully articulate why. What had compelled him to open his heart to this woman he scarcely knew? Perhaps it was the shared anguish mirrored in her eyes, an echo of his own shadowed past. Perhaps it was simply recognizing a decent soul ensnared in a nightmarish predicament. Whatever the cause, he knew he could not stand idly by and witness her ruin. They are perilous men, Jedediah, she cautioned, her voice tinged with warning. They will stop at nothing to achieve their ends. Then we shall be prepared for them, he countered, his voice turning steely. I've stared down dangerous men before, Willa. And I harbor no fear. He clasped her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. The contact sent a surge of electricity through him, a spark of something dormant that had lain untouched for years. It was more than simple protectiveness. It was a connection, a bond forged in mutual vulnerability and the burgeoning promise of hope. The sun began its descent below the horizon, painting long shadows across the verdant expanse of the garden. The air grew crisp, but the warmth of their newfound resolve seemed to repel the chill. Jedediah understood that the tranquility they had discovered in this secluded haven was about to be shattered. But he also knew that he would not confront it as a solitary figure. He had Willa, and she had him, and, united, they would fight for their right to a new dawn, regardless of the cost. The garden, a symbol of rejuvenation and promise, stood as a silent testament to their budding connection, a fragile sanctuary poised on the precipice of encroaching darkness. He squeezed her hand, a wordless pledge of protection, a vow to remain by her side until the bitter end. Lessons in courage. The Montana sun, a blazing disk in the azure expanse, radiated heat onto the small patch of cleared land behind Jedediah's cabin. The mingled fragrances of pine needles and moist soil filled the air, sharpened by the subtle aroma of gun solvent. Willa braced herself, the rifle feeling foreign, and unwieldy in her grip. A Winchester, aged yet meticulously cared for, its wooden stock polished smooth from years of use. Jedediah stood nearby, his presence a comforting anchor. "All right," he began, his tone even and devoid of criticism. "Let's start with your stance. Feet at shoulder width, one slightly forward. Shoulders relaxed. Don't lock those elbows." Willa adjusted her footing, acutely aware of her inexperience. She'd never handled a firearm before, much less discharged one. In St. Louis, such implements belonged to men hunters, soldiers. Here, at the world's edge, it felt vital. "Now, raise the rifle," Jedediah directed. "Firmly seat the butt against your shoulder, but not too tight. Settle your cheek against the stock. That's your point of contact." The rifle's heft surprised her as she lifted it. It trembled slightly. "It's substantial," she observed, stating the obvious. Jedediah concurred. "It is. You'll acclimate. The weight mitigates the kickback." He reached out, subtly adjusting her hand position. "Notice how your finger rests on the trigger? Don't jerk it. Squeeze steady and gradual." He retreated, granting her space. "The target is that old stump downrange." He indicated the time-worn wood about 50 yards distant. "Take your time. Breathe deeply. Concentrate." Willa strained her eyes, attempting to sharpen the stump's image. Her pulse quickened in her chest. This was more than marksmanship. It was self-preservation, seizing control. It was about defying the fear that had shadowed her steps for so long. She drew a long breath, recalling Jedediah's instructions: balanced stance, loose shoulders, gradual trigger pull. She aligned the sights, the front post wavering faintly against the blurred outline of the stump. "Remember to breathe," Jedediah prompted gently. She exhaled slowly, holding her breath as she compressed the trigger. The rifle jolted against her shoulder. A surprisingly sharp impact. The gunshot reverberated through the clearing, scattering a covey of birds from the nearby trees. She lowered the weapon, her ears ringing. I think I missed," she confessed, a wave of disappointment washing over her. Jedediah approached the stump, examining it closely. He returned, a faint smile gracing his features. "You grazed it, just to the left." "Grazed it?" she echoed, feeling slightly foolish. "Means you were close. Closer than you realize. Now, let's try again. This time, focus on your breath, and don't tense up expecting the recoil. Let it happen." They repeated the exercise, again and again. Willa's shoulder ached, her hand smudged with gunpowder residue. Her shots varied wildly, landing short or soaring high. Yet, with each discharge, she grew more confident, more composed. Jedediah remained patient, offering understated encouragement and minor corrections. He never criticized, never belittled. He simply guided, imparting his expertise and his unwavering support. Eventually, he suggested a pause. "Let's rest a spell," he suggested. "Shooting saps your strength more than you imagine." They settled onto a fallen log, sipping water from a canteen. The sun climbed higher, casting elongated shadows across the clearing. "Thank you, Jedediah," Willa said, turning to him. "For this? For teaching me?" He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "You needed to learn, and I happen to know a thing or two about rifles." "It's more than that," she insisted. "You didn't have to. You could have just left me to my own devices." He finally met her gaze, his expression enigmatic. "Maybe I didn't want you to be left to your own devices." A silence descended, thick with unspoken meaning. Willa averted her eyes, a warmth spreading through her chest. Her feelings for Jedediah weren't solely gratitude, they were something deeper, more intricate. They resumed their practice, and as the afternoon wore on, Willa discovered a rhythm. Her shots became increasingly consistent, more precise. Though misses still occurred, she also struck the stump with growing regularity. Once, she hit the stump squarely, the bullet splintering wood in a small explosion. She lowered the rifle, a triumphant grin lighting her face. "I did it!" she exclaimed, disbelief coloring her voice. Jedediah nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "You did. You're a natural." Willa laughed, a spontaneous, uninhibited sound. An empowering surge of confidence coursed through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was about more than target practice. It was about proving her capabilities, her resilience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in long shadows, they gathered their gear. Willa diligently cleaned the rifle, adhering to Jedediah's instructions. She felt a burgeoning connection to the weapon, a newfound respect for its power. "Tomorrow," Jedediah announced as they headed toward the cabin, "we'll cover reloading, and then we'll practice at greater distances." "Tomorrow," Willa echoed, a thrill of anticipation running through her. She knew that Kane and his crew still posed a threat, but she also knew that she was not defenseless. She had Jedediah, and she had the growing conviction that she could confront whatever awaited them. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the day's events. She reflected on Jedediah's patience, his quiet fortitude, his unwavering support. She considered the feel of the rifle, the sharp jolt of recoil, the satisfying impact of bullet on wood. And she pondered the fear that had spurred her, the fear she was slowly, deliberately, overcoming. Jedediah's lessons in courage were about more than just self-defense. They were about rediscovering her self-belief, about tapping into her inner reserves of strength, and facing the gathering darkness head-on. Interrupted romance, the afternoon sun, a warm hand on Willa's back, accompanied her as she knelt, gingerly setting out the tender seedlings Jedediah had helped cultivate. Her garden, once a desolate patch, blossomed into a burgeoning haven. A glance revealed Jedediah, brow furrowed in concentration, as he tweaked the makeshift irrigation system pieced together from scraps. The mingled scents of moist earth and blossoming thyme permeated the air, a fragrant testament to their shared endeavor. A true smile graced Willa's lips. It was more than a garden, a symbol of hope taking root in the shared earth of their lives. "Thank you, Jedediah," she murmured, the words carried on the breeze. He straightened, meeting her gaze. His calloused hands told tales of an outdoor life, the crinkles around his eyes deepening with a hesitant, heartening smile. "It's nothing, Willa, just helping out." Yet his gaze conveyed a profound meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the budding connection between them, nurtured by teamwork and serene companionship. As twilight brushed the sky with fiery hues, Jedediah spread a thick blanket on a gentle knoll overlooking the valley. He'd prepared a simple picnic bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a treasured bottle of wine. Willa joined him, bearing a small nosegay of wildflowers plucked from her burgeoning garden. The air held a refreshing coolness, laced with the aromas of pine and distant wood smoke drifting from town. "I didn't realize we were celebrating," Willa teased, a playful note in her voice. Jedediah chuckled, a resonant rumble that vibrated within her. "Just thought our efforts warranted summer recognition." He invited her to sit, and she settled beside him, the blanket offering a soft welcome. Over their meal, they discussed commonplace things. The weather's whims, the garden's progress, the local wildlife's antics. However, beneath the surface, an undercurrent of unspoken emotion flowed, drawing them irrevocably closer. The ensuing silence felt comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that needed no translation. Jedediah poured wine, the ruby liquid catching the fading light. Raising his glass, he offered, "To new beginnings." Willa's glass met his in a delicate chime, her gaze fixed on his. "To new beginnings," she echoed, her voice tinged with hope. As the first stars pricked the darkening canvas above, Jedediah turned to Willa, his expression grave. "Willa," he began, his voice a low timbre. "These past weeks I've cherished them beyond words." A nervous flutter arose in Willa's chest. She felt it too, the undeniable pull towards him. Yet fear lingered, the fear of repeating past mistakes, of vulnerability leading to renewed heartache. "Jedediah," she whispered, her voice faint. I feel it as well." He reached out, his hand gently cradling her cheek. His touch, a blend of warmth and roughness, sent a shiver racing down her spine. "I know you've suffered, Willa. I know you're afraid, but I'm not like him." Her eyes searched his, seeking solace in their depths. She found only genuine sincerity, a pure desire to safeguard and cherish her. "I know," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And that's what frightens me most." He leaned closer, his breath a gentle caress against her face. "Don't be afraid, Willa. Let me demonstrate what it means to be cherished, to be truly loved." And then he kissed her. The kiss was soft, exploratory, as if seeking permission. As their lips met, a spark ignited, a dormant flame bursting into life. Willa surrendered to the kiss, her anxieties dissolving momentarily in the warmth and tenderness of his embrace. Jedediah deepened the kiss, his arms encircling her, drawing her closer. The world receded, leaving only the two of them bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon. They parted, breathless, their eyes locked in a silent dialogue. Willa's cheeks flushed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Jedediah's gaze burned with a mirrored longing. "I?" Willa stammered, words failing her. Jedediah offered a knowing smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You don't need to say anything," he murmured. "I understand." Another kiss followed, a tender promise sealing the unspoken bond. They reclined on the blanket, gazing at the celestial display, their hands entwined. For the first time in ages, Willa experienced a profound sense of peace, of belonging. She was home. Abruptly, Jedediah tensed. He sat up, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "What is it?" Willa asked, a prickle of unease in her stomach. He pointed towards the distant hills. "Riders," he declared, his voice now edged with steel. "Headed this way." Willa's followed his line of sight. Initially, she saw only the shadowy silhouette of the hills against the starry backdrop, but soon she spotted them minute, dark forms astride horses, rapidly covering ground. They were too distant for identification, but their destination was unmistakable: the ranch. A wave of icy dread washed over her. She knew, with chilling certainty, their identities. The past had finally caught up. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've found me." Jedediah's grip tightened around her. "Who, Willa? Who are they?" But Willa was mute, paralyzed by resurfacing memories. The menacing faces, the threatening tones, the suffocating fear all surged back, threatening to drown her. Jedediah shook her gently. Willa, tell me, who are they? Finally she found her voice, a raspy whisper lost on the wind. They're the men I fled from. The men who... The words choked in her throat. The recollections were too potent, too harrowing. Jedediah's face hardened. He rose, pulling Willa to her feet. We need to get you inside, he stated firmly. Now. Snatching up the blanket and picnic remnants, he bundled them into the basket. Willa trailed behind him, her limbs heavy, her mind consumed by panic. The idyllic interlude, the hesitant steps towards renewal, shattered, replaced by the grim reality of her history. The riders approached, bearing danger in their wake. Their delicate bond, their nascent happiness, stood on the precipice of an unimaginable trial. The stars, moments ago benevolent, now mocked her with their remote indifference. The night had turned sinister, a harbinger of the coming storm. A desperate kiss dust devils, like malevolent spirits, spiraled closer, a visual echo of the anxiety gnawing Jedediah's stomach. Willa, backlit by the dying sun, her golden hair ablaze, watched the approaching riders. A ghost of fear flickered in her gaze, quickly banished by a flinty resolve that mirrored his own. He sought her hand, his rough fingers finding hers. Her skin, a sun-baked warmth, felt like solid ground against the rising tide of dread. They're here, she breathed. The whisper deceptively waited. I see them. His response, a low rumble, was equally measured. He squeezed her hand. We'll be ready. The air vibrated with unspoken history, a shared past both brief and potent, overshadowed by the looming unknown. He saw not just a woman he was drawn to, but a survivor etched with grit. A long-dormant protectiveness roared to life within him, obliterating the self-imposed exile he'd embraced for so long. He closed the small space between them, framing her face in his hands. The raw vulnerability in her luminous eyes reflected his own fractured soul, yet within that reflection he saw a captivating strength, a siren's call of resilience. He brushed a stray tendril from her cheek. Willa, he began, his voice thick. No matter what happens, her finger pressed against his lips, a silent plea. Don't, she urged, her voice trembling faintly. Don't say things you might regret. I won't regret this, he countered, his gaze unwavering. I won't regret anything I feel. The confession hung between them, thick with unspoken longing. The riders were closing in, their shapes resolving against the fiery sunset. Time was evaporating. He lowered his gaze, locking eyes with her. Beyond the apprehension, he glimpsed a fervent hope, a mirroring desire. He dipped his head, his lips hovering an inch from hers. Jedediah, she sighed, a soft supplication. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender supplication and desperate bargain, a silent promise against her skin. It was a kiss forged from fear and yearning, from shared scars and the fragile bloom of a forbidden affection. It tasted of dust, sweat, and the unacknowledged understanding that their world was about to shatter. The kiss deepened, a frantic search for connection in the face of annihilation. He channeled every suppressed emotion, the solitude, the terror, the flickering ember of hope, the simmering desire that had haunted him for weeks. She met him in kind, her arms circling his neck, her body molding against his. For a suspended, ethereal moment, the world contracted to just the two of them. No riders, no threat, no ghosts. Only the raw surge of their connection. The thundering of hooves ripped through the fragile sanctuary. Reality slammed back, brutal and unforgiving. He broke the kiss, reluctantly drawing away from her embrace. He scanned her eyes, seeking any crack in her armor, but he found only the steely gleam of resolve. "We'll face them together," he declared, his voice steady. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Together," she echoed. He relinquished her, pivoting toward the house. "I'll get my rifle." He strode toward the cabin, each step decisive, his mind sharpening. He retrieved his rifle from its place above the hearth, its familiar weight reassuring. He checked the action, verifying its readiness. He grabbed his ammunition belt, fastening it around his waist. When he emerged, Willa stood waiting, a rifle cradled in her own arms. He hadn't suspected she possessed one. She held it with a practiced ease that both surprised and bolstered him. "Where did you learn to shoot?" he inquired. "My father taught me," she answered, her tone matter-of-fact. "He believed every woman should know how to defend herself." He nodded, impressed. "Good." They moved in tandem, taking positions behind the weathered fence bordering the garden. The barrier offered scant protection, a mere delay against determined men on horseback. The riders were upon them, their faces sharpening into focus in the fading light. He recognized the leader immediately, a man carved from granite, with a cruel glint in his eyes. The one Willa had fled. "Stay behind me," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "Let me handle them." "I'm not hiding," she stated, her voice ringing with defiance. "This is my land now, and I'll defend it." He knew arguing was futile. She was a force of nature, as unyielding as the terrain itself. He respected it. The riders halted their mounts just beyond the fence line. The leader dismounted, his gaze predatory on Willa. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his voice laced with venom. "Look what we have here. Little Willa, playing at homesteading." Willa held her ground, her rifle unwavering. "Get off my land, Caleb," she commanded, her voice steady as a stone. Caleb's laughter was a harsh rasp. "Your land? You think running changes anything, Willa? You belong to us." "I belong to no one," she spat back, her voice vibrating with defiance. Caleb's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're making a mistake, Willa, a grave mistake." He gestured dismissively at Jedediah. "And who's this geriatric fool? Your hired muscle?" Jedediah stepped forward, raising his rifle. "She requires no protection," he said, his voice even but resonant. "But were she to, I'd be honored to oblige." Caleb's face contorted in a mask of fury. "You stay out of this, old man. This is none of your affair." "It's my affair now," Jedediah retorted, his gaze locked. "She's under my protection." A tense silence descended, punctuated only by the restless snorts of the horses. The two men faced off, their eyes locked in a silent contest of wills. Willa's fate, and perhaps Jedediah's own, trembled in the balance. Jedediah knew this was merely the opening act, the deceptive quiet before the deluge, and he was braced to meet it, irrespective of the cost, because he knew, with a shocking clarity, that he would sacrifice everything to safeguard Willa. Everything. He glanced at her, her features a study in determination, and a renewed sense of purpose surged through him. He wasn't just shielding her, he was defending the fragile hope she had reignited within him, the possibility of a future he had believed irrevocably lost. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his knuckles bone white. The memory of their desperate kiss seared through him, a potent reminder of what he was defending. Cain's arrival, the earthy fragrance of freshly tilled soil, a beacon of burgeoning life, permeated the air. Willa, cheeks ablaze from physical labor, rested on her shovel, her gaze fixed on Jedediah as he hammered another fence post into place. The barrier, erected to safeguard her sprouting vegetable patch from ravenous deer, gained definition under his skilled ministrations. Each strike of the hammer, each guttural sound of exertion, resonated with a potent strength that both reassured and unnerved her. A burgeoning sense of gratitude, a sentiment long suppressed, took root within her. On the distant horizon, heat devils pirouetted, ominous precursors of a trouble all too familiar. Jedediah paused, his eyes mirroring her own apprehension as he tracked her gaze. He, too, recognized the approaching cloud not of rain, but of riders, a considerable number, bearing down on her dwelling. A cold fist clutched at Willa's insides. Her past had finally come calling. "Get inside," Jedediah's voice rumbled, laced with urgency. He positioned himself as a bulwark between her and the imminent threat, his stance a silent pledge of protection. "Bar the door." A retort sprang to her lips, a desire to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, but rationality prevailed. She was no match for what loomed. Drawing a shaky breath, she retreated towards the cabin, her pulse hammering in her ears. As she gained the porch, the horsemen resolved into distinct figures, their expressions etched with grim resolve. Their leader, a man whose eyes held the glint of honed flint, reined in mere yards from Jedediah. Broad of shoulder, sporting a meticulously trimmed mustache that belied the cruelty etched around his mouth, it could be none other than Cain Barlow. "Afternoon," Cain drawled, his voice a low, resonant murmur that easily spanned the distance. "We're looking for Willa Nash." His gaze flickered toward the cabin's entrance before returning to Jedediah. "Seems she's in possession of something that belongs to me." Jedediah stood firm, his face an inscrutable mask. "She isn't expecting visitors." A harsh, humorless chuckle escaped Cain's lips. "That's a damn shame, seeing as we're here regardless. Tell her Cain Barlow's calling, and my patience is wearing thin." With a gesture, he dispersed his men, effectively encircling the cabin. The very air thrummed with menace. Peering through a sliver in the doorframe, Willa felt a shiver cascade down her spine. Cain hadn't mellowed with time. The same chilling magnetism, the same barely veiled threat, still clung to him. Her fingers tightened around the rifle she'd snatched from the corner, her knuckles bone white. Jedediah remained unyielding. "Whatever you believe she possesses is a delusion. Willa's a widow, leading a solitary existence." "A solitary existence financed by pilfered property," Cain retorted, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Her departed husband, may he rot, relieved me of a valuable item. Something I intend to recover." He paused for effect, letting the words sink in like venom. "Now, are you going to fetch her, or do I have to become less reasonable?" The threat hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Jedediah's countenance remained impassive. Though Willa perceived the subtle clenching of his jaw, he was calculating, weighing the odds, one man against so many, yet she knew he would not yield. She wouldn't permit him to face this alone. Inhaling deeply, she thrust open the door and stepped onto the porch. Every eye swung to meet hers. "Cain," she announced, her voice remarkably steady. "What an unexpected pleasure." A predatory grin stretched across Cain's face. "Willa, darling, how accommodating of you to appear. I was beginning to suspect you were playing possum." He dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his bulky frame, his eyes never breaking contact with her own. Now, about the item your late husband so foolishly absconded with He's dead, Cain, Willa interjected, her tone hardening. Any debts he incurred died with him. Debts owed to me possess a remarkable longevity, Cain murmured, the menace in his voice amplified by its softness. He made off with something that belonged to me, a ledger, and its return is my sole purpose. I don't possess such a thing, Willa declared, meeting his gaze squarely. I know nothing of a ledger. Cain arched an eyebrow, his smile widening into a mocking leer. Don't insult my intelligence, Willa. I am fully aware he entrusted it to you. Claimed you were the only soul he trusted. He closed the distance between them, invading her personal sphere. Where is it hidden? Jedediah stepped forward, interposing himself between Willa and Cain. She stated she doesn't have it. Perhaps it's time to entertain the notion that your ledger is a figment of your imagination. Cain's attention snapped to Jedediah, his expression hardening into a dangerous scowl. And who might you be, friend? You appear to have developed a fondness for my acquaintance. I'm a friend, Jedediah responded, his tone unwavering. And I am advising you to leave her undisturbed. A short, barking laugh erupted from Cain's throat. You believe you can halt me? You, and what legion? He gestured to his posse, who shifted restlessly in their saddles, their hands hovering near their sidearms. I have 20 men at my command, all fiercely loyal. What forces do you command? Enough, Jedediah stated, his gaze unwavering. Reaching behind him, his hand settled upon the rifle propped against the porch. I suggest you reevaluate your approach, Cain. This is my land, and I determine who receives hospitality and who receives a swift departure. The tension in the atmosphere was so thick it could be physically cleaved. Willa watched, her heart hammering against her ribs as the two men locked horns, engaged in a silent battle of wills. Cain was unaccustomed to denial, and wouldn't accept it meekly. Jedediah, she was certain, would not waver. You are making a grave error, friend, Cain finally said, his voice low and laced with malice. This is not your affair. Simply step aside, and you have my guarantee of immunity. It becomes my affair when you terrorize a woman on her own property, Jedediah countered, his grip tightening on the rifle's stock. Now, I'll only say this once. Depart, and refrain from returning. Cain held Jedediah's gaze for what felt like an eternity, his eyes smoldering with barely contained rage. Then, with deliberate slowness, he shook his head. You're a fool, he conceded, his voice little more than a whisper. However, I am impressed by your devotion. Very well, I'll humor you for now. But heed my words, Willa. I shall return, and my next visit will lack any semblance of gentility. He spun on his heel and swung back into the saddle, his gaze lingering on Willa for a fleeting moment, before he spurred his horse into a full gallop, his band of riders thundering in his wake. The dust billowed in their wake, momentarily obscuring their retreat. Willa remained transfixed until they vanished from sight, her body trembling uncontrollably. An unsettling certainty gripped her this was far from resolved. The first gunfight the morning sun, still low in the sky, cast long shadows as Jedediah helped Willa stake young tomato plants in her burgeoning garden. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of damp earth and blossoming herbs. Willa straightened, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Thank you, Jedediah. I never thought I'd see this place so alive again. He leaned on his shovel, returning the smile. You've got a green thumb, Willa. Just needed a little help getting started. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the distant tree line. An unease settled over him, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Speaking of getting started, I should probably head back and check on the horses. Before Willa could respond, a thunderous volley of gunfire shattered the morning calm. Bullets ripped through the air, tearing into the wooden fence posts bordering Willa's property. Jedediah reacted instantly, shoving Willa to the ground behind a raised garden bed. "Get down! Stay low!" he roared, his voice barely audible above the din. From their vantage point they could see them, Kane Barlow and a dozen men on horseback, spread out along the edge of the tree line, rifles blazing. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the whine of ricocheting bullets. It was a coordinated attack aimed at both Willa's ranch and Jedediah's own in the distance. "They're here for the ledger," Willa gasped, her eyes wide with terror, clutching the earth. Jedediah drew his revolver, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his hand. "Stay here. I'll cover you." He risked a quick glance, assessing the situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in the open. Their only chance was to make it to the house for better cover. He squeezed off a few shots, aiming high to suppress the attackers. "No! Run!" He grabbed Willa's hand and pulled her along, dodging behind the smokehouse and making a dash for the relative safety of the cabin. Bullets whizzed past them, tearing splinters from the wooden walls. Reaching the front porch, Jedediah kicked open the door and shoved Willa inside. He followed close behind, slamming the door shut and barricading it with a heavy oak table. The small cabin felt suddenly claustrophobic, the sounds of gunfire amplified within its confines. Willa scrambled for her rifle, a Winchester lever action, kept above the fireplace. Jedediah watched her, surprised by her purposeful movements. "Do you know how to use that thing?" he asked, reloading his revolver. She met his gaze, her fear replaced by a steely resolve. "My husband wasn't always honest. I learned what I had to." She checked the rifle's action, her movements fluid and practiced. The first bullets struck the cabin, shattering windows and peppering the walls. Jedediah positioned himself near a window, using the shattered glass as a makeshift firing port. "They're coming closer. Stay back. Keep your head down." Kane's voice boomed from outside. "Willa Nash, we know you're in there. Hand over the ledger, and we might let you walk away." Willa ignored him, calmly taking aim through a gap in the boarded-up window. "Don't listen to him, Jedediah. He won't let us live no matter what." The front door splintered under a barrage of gunfire. Jedediah returned fire, his shots precise and deadly, forcing the attackers to retreat momentarily. He glanced at Willa, impressed by her composure. She was a different woman than the fragile widow he had come to know. "They'll try to flank us," Jedediah said, his voice grim. "We need to cover the back." They moved quickly, Jedediah taking the lead, clearing a path to the back door. As they reached the rear of the cabin, they saw two of Kane's men attempting to sneak around the side. Jedediah fired, hitting one in the leg, sending him sprawling. Willa raised her rifle, took aim, and fired. The second man dropped like a stone, a crimson stain blooming on his chest. The shot was clean, precise, and utterly unexpected. Jedediah stared at her, stunned. Willa lowered the rifle, her face pale but resolute. "I told you. I learned what I had to." The gunfire intensified, the attackers growing bolder. They were closing in, and the cabin wouldn't hold for long. Jedediah knew they needed to change their strategy, and fast. He looked at Willa, seeing not fear, but a grim determination mirrored in his own eyes. They were in this together, and they would fight to survive. Wounded defender, the world erupted as a storm of lead tore through the serenity of the garden. Jedediah, tending his nascent tomato plants, recoiled as agony blossomed in his left arm. He faltered, his trowel ringing against the packed earth, a dark stain blooming on his shirt. "Jedediah!" Willa's cry, sharp with fright, sliced through the din. Abandoning her watering can, the life-giving water gurgled into the thirsty soil as she rushed to his side. Bullets buzzed like angry hornets, puffing small craters in the dirt around them. He bit back a groan, the pain a scorching brand. "Willa, take cover," he croaked, attempting to guide her behind the meager protection of the low stone wall. Instead, she moved with a newfound resolve blazing in her eyes. "No," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm finished with hiding." She snatched a rifle from a nearby stack, her movements surprisingly fluid and practiced. He stared, dumbfounded, as she took aim, her gaze sweeping the tree line where the shots originated. An attempt to rise sent him reeling, and he collapsed back onto his knees. His shirt was saturated now, a viscous warmth creeping down his arm. "You're hit," she stated, her tone softening, but her focus remained laser-sharp. "Stay down. I've got you." He wanted to protest, to take charge, but the searing pain in his arm robbed him of the words. Besides, her eyes held a steely glint that admitted no argument. He watched as she inhaled deeply and returned fire, the rifle kicking against her shoulder with each report. The exchange, a brief and brutal dance, saw Willa maneuver with unexpected grace, utilizing the wall for cover, each shot measured and true. Through a haze of pain, Jedediah saw one of the assailants stumble, clutching his leg. Then, as abruptly as it began, the firing ceased, leaving an unsettling quiet in its wake. Willa remained low, rifle at the ready, eyes narrowed, searching the woods. "They're gone," she announced, her voice tight with suppressed adrenaline. "For now." Turning to Jedediah, her expression softened with worry. "Let's see that arm." He allowed her to help him towards the porch, his legs unsteady. She eased him onto the swing, her touch firm and capable. He observed as she tore a length from her petticoat, the action quick and assured. "This will sting," she warned gently as she began to cleanse the wound. He winced as the makeshift bandage pressed against the raw flesh. "It's just a scratch." He lied, attempting to minimize the injury. He knew it was worse. The bullet had carved a path through muscle, leaving a jagged tear. Willa offered no comment, entirely absorbed in tending his injury. Her brow was creased in concentration, her lips a thin line of focus. He watched her, a tenderness he hadn't felt in ages welling in his chest. This woman, who had entered his life like sunlight after a long period of gloom, was now defending him with a ferocity he never imagined. "Who were they, Willa?" he asked, his voice strained. "Who's after you?" She hesitated, her gaze clouding with a sorrow that mirrored his own pain. "Associates of my late husband," she confessed, her voice barely audible. He wasn't always on the right side of the law. Jedediah knew better than to pry. He saw the anguish in her eyes, the weight of secrets born in silence. Reaching out, he took her hand, his fingers closing around hers in a comforting grip. "You don't owe me any explanations," he assured her, his voice gentle. "Just know I'm here for you. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Her eyes swam with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "More than you know." She finished bandaging his arm, her touch gentle despite the urgency. "We need to get you inside," she urged. "And prepare. They'll be back." Together, they made their way into the cabin, Willa supporting him. Once inside, she settled him on the sofa before gathering supplies with quiet efficiency, her movements suggesting a familiarity with firearms and defense that contradicted her gentle nature. "What can I do?" Jedediah asked, feeling helpless. "Rest," she commanded gently. "Conserve your strength. I'll take care of things for now." She set about barricading windows, reinforcing doors, and checking their stores of ammunition. He watched her, his chest swelling with a blend of admiration and worry. He knew she possessed the skills, knew she was strong, but she shouldn't have to be. As darkness descended, they sat in a strained silence, broken only by the crackling fire. Jedediah leaned against the cushions, his arm throbbing, his mind besieged by questions. Who were these men? What did they want? And what lengths would they go to in order to obtain it? Suddenly, a voice shattered the stillness, echoing from the darkness beyond the cabin walls. "Willa Nash, we know you're in there. We just want what's owed. Hand over the ledger, and this ends now." Jedediah recognized the voice. Cain Barlow. Willa rose, her face a mask of grim determination. Approaching a window, she peered into the blackness. "Get off my land, Cain," she spat, her voice ringing with defiance. "You'll get nothing here." Barlow chuckled, a grating sound that sent chills down Jedediah's spine. "Think you can stop us, Willa? You and your crippled bodyguard? You're mistaken. We'll be back, and mercy will be in short supply next time." He paused, adding with icy menace, "Tell your friend he picked the wrong side. He should have kept out of it. Now, he's just another liability." Willa gave no reply. She remained there, lit by the firelight, the rifle held firm. Jedediah watched, fiercely protective. This was war. He knew he would give everything to protect her. The silence returned, heavier and more foreboding. Jedediah searched her face, concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She turned, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "I will be," she declared, her voice unwavering. "We will. We just have to be ready." She crossed to the sofa and knelt, taking his hand. "Thank you, Jedediah," she said, her voice thick. "For everything." He squeezed her hand, his heart overflowing with a love that defied logic. "We're in this together, Willa," he asserted, his voice full of commitment. "Always." Planning the defense, Jedediah sat on the porch swing, his left arm cradled in a makeshift sling fashioned from an old flour sack. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the garden, highlighting the disturbed earth where the attack had taken place. He winced as he shifted, the pain a dull throb that he tried to ignore. His gaze, however, was sharp, assessing the landscape with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his life reading the land. Willa emerged from the cabin, carrying a steaming mug. She moved with a newfound confidence, her shoulders squared, her eyes holding a glint of steel Jedediah hadn't seen before. She handed him the mug, her fingers brushing his. Coffee. Strong. He took a sip, the bitter brew burning a welcome path down his throat. "Thanks. Needed that." He set the mug down on the porch beside him. "They'll be back, Willa. Cain doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily." Willa nodded, her jaw tight. "I know. We need a plan." "We do." Jedediah surveyed their surroundings. "This place, it's got advantages. The woods are dense, the creek's a natural barrier. We can use that." He pointed towards the narrow path, leading up to the cabin. That's their most likely approach. We funnel them in. Funnel them how? Willa asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Traps. Jedediah's eyes gleamed with a calculating light. Simple ones. Things to slow them down, disorient them. We use the element of surprise. He spent the next hour detailing his plan, his voice low and steady, sketching diagrams in the dirt with a twig. He explained how they could use fallen logs to create obstacles, how to rig tripwires connected to noisemakers to alert them to the gang's approach, and how to create concealed pits to trap the unwary. He described the terrain, pointing out natural choke points and areas where they could set up ambushes. Willa listened intently, absorbing every detail. She asked questions, probing for weaknesses in his strategy, offering her own suggestions. Jedediah was impressed by her quick grasp of the situation and her willingness to learn. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was a partner, a survivor. The key, Jedediah emphasized, is to make them think they have the upper hand. Lure them in, then hit them when they least expect it. As darkness fell, they gathered their supplies. Rope, wire, sharpened stakes, and old cans filled with pebbles. They worked in silence, their movements efficient and coordinated, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the hooting of an owl in the distance. Jedediah, despite his injury, pushed himself, driven by a fierce protectiveness towards Willa and a burning desire to defend his home. Willa, in turn, seemed to draw strength from his resolve, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. They started with the tripwires, carefully stringing them across the path at ankle height, connecting them to tin cans hidden in the undergrowth. A tug on the wire would send the cans rattling, alerting them to the gang's presence. Next, they dug shallow pits, camouflaging them with leaves and branches, lining the bottom with sharpened stakes. Jedediah showed Willa how to position the stakes at an angle, ensuring that anyone who fell in would be impaled. "This is brutal," Willa said, her voice barely a whisper as she hammered a stake into the ground. "It's survival," Jedediah replied, his voice firm. "They won't hesitate to kill us, Willa. We have to be prepared to do what it takes to protect ourselves." They worked through the night, their bodies aching, their hands raw. Jedediah showed Willa how to use the surrounding trees for cover, how to aim a rifle, how to reload quickly and efficiently. He taught her the basics of hand-to-hand combat, emphasizing the importance of using her weight and leverage to her advantage. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, they stood back to survey their work. The garden path, once a welcoming entrance to their home, was now a gauntlet of hidden dangers. It was a grim transformation, but a necessary one. Jedediah looked at Willa, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You did good, Willa. Real good." Willa managed a weak smile. "I hope it's enough." "It will be," Jedediah said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll make it enough." He paused, then added, "After this is over, we're going to rebuild the garden. Make it even better than before." Willa nodded, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "I'd like that, Jedediah. I'd like that very much." They moved back to the cabin, exhausted but resolute. They cleaned their weapons, ate a meager breakfast, and waited. The silence of the morning was heavy with anticipation, broken only by the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the wind. They knew Cain and his men would come. It was just a matter of time. And when they did, they would be ready. The final assault, the morning sun, a heartless reminder of what they'd lost, stretched long, accusing fingers across the parched earth, as Willa, hands roughened yet tender, nestled the tomato sprout into the soil. Jedediah, perched on the porch, kept watch. The Winchester, a cold counterpoint to the fragile life she nurtured. "Think they'll take?" she murmured, her gaze fixed on the task, voice as light as the aspen leaves trembling in the breeze. "They will with tending," Jedediah's voice, gravelly with sleeplessness, offered. He welcomed the momentary peace, a respite from the dread clawing at his insides. Cain wouldn't tarry. The man was a viper, trapped and venomous. A sharp report cracked the stillness. Another followed. Closer now. Willa's head snapped up, a streak of loam marring her cheek. What was that? Jedediah offered no reply, rising with the rifle. His eyes scanned the horizon. A plume of smoke, a malignant smudge against the clear sky, billowed in the distance. The outbuildings. Then, movement. Shadows darting between the trees, too many to count. "They're here," he stated, a somber pronouncement. "Get inside, Willa." "No." No argument came. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, yet hardened with defiance. She moved with intent, vanishing into the cabin as he braced himself behind the haphazard barricade of sandbags and upturned furniture. The assault commenced with fire. Flaming brands arced through the air, landing on the tinder-dry brush and wooden bra. Structures, consuming them in a ravenous blaze. The reek of burning timber mingled with the terrified squeals of penned animals. Jedediah's jaw clenched. He wouldn't be baited. He had to maintain his position. Then came the concussions. Cain's men had brought dynamite, crude but devastating. The earth shuddered as the first charge detonated near the barn, showering them with splinters and clods of dirt. The chicken coop disintegrated in a second blast, a blizzard of feathers and debris. Jedediah spotted Cain, a monstrous silhouette against the inferno, his face a canvas of raw fury. He bellowed, "Willa! Come out, Willa! We know you're in there. Just the ledger, and nobody else gets hurt." Jedediah ignored the taunt. Sighting down the barrel, he squeezed the trigger. A young man, rifle raised, attempting to outflank the cabin, pitched forward. The shootout began in earnest. Bullets buzzed past Jedediah, biting into the wood and kicking up dust. He returned fire, eliminating targets with cool precision, rationing his ammunition. He was outmanned, but he held the high ground, and surprise was on his side. Willa materialized from the cabin, a shotgun cradled in her arms, her expression resolute. "I'm ready," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm. Jedediah nodded, a spark of pride flickering within him. "Back window. Cover me." She moved without pause, disappearing inside. The shattering of glass signaled her arrival at her post. They had prepared defenses, rudimentary but effective. Strands of barbed wire stretched taut between trees, camouflaged pitfalls concealed beneath foliage. As Cain's men advanced, they tripped the traps, hindering their progress and disrupting their cohesion. One man blundered into a tripwire, unleashing a swarm of angry wasps. He shrieked, swatting wildly, his rifle clattering to the ground. Jedediah didn't hesitate. A single shot ended the man's torment. The battle swirled, a cacophony of gunfire, detonations, and cries of pain. Jedediah fought with a primal intensity, fueled by the need to shield Willa, to safeguard the fragile hope they had dared to cultivate. He caught sight of Cain again, closer now, his eyes burning with venom. Cain raised his rifle, taking aim. Jedediah knew he was the target. He steeled himself, bracing for the impact. A thunderous boom erupted from the cabin's rear. Cain stumbled, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clanging on the hard-packed ground. Willa had unleashed the shotgun's fury. Cain roared in agony and rage, pivoting towards the cabin, abandoning his pursuit of Jedediah. "You bitch!" he screamed. "Oh, kill you for that!" Jedediah seized the advantage, charging from behind the barricade, firing as he moved. The bullets tore through Cain's legs, scattering them like chaff. He reached Cain, his Winchester spent. He dropped the rifle and lunged, tackling Cain in the dirt. They grappled, rolling in the dust, each fighting for dominance. Cain possessed superior size and strength, but Jedediah fought for more than simple survival. He fought for Willa, for the chance at redemption, for the promise of a future. A blow landed on Cain's jaw, sending him stumbling. Cain roared, swinging wildly, his fist connecting with Jedediah's ribs. A sharp spike of pain radiated through him, yet he pressed on. He seized Cain's arm, wrenching it behind him. Cain screamed, his voice hoarse with agony. "You can't win, Jedediah," he choked out. "I'll burn this whole place to the ground." "Not today," Jedediah snarled, increasing the pressure. A voice cut through the din, clear and urgent. "Jedediah, watch out." "Willa." Jedediah glanced up, just in time to see one of Cain's henchmen leveling a rifle. Reaction was impossible. Then, a flash of movement. Willa launched herself from the cabin, a knife gleaming in her grip. She slammed into the gunman, knocking him off balance. The rifle discharged, the bullet singing harmlessly into the sky. Jedediah reacted instantly, slamming Cain's head against the earth, rendering him unconscious. He turned to Willa and the gunman, locked in a desperate struggle for the knife. He rushed to her, kicking the gunman squarely in the head. The man collapsed, unmoving. Jedediah knelt beside Willa, his hands unsteady. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. She nodded, her face ashen but determined. "I'm fine," she whispered, just as shaken. The remaining members of Cain's gang, witnessing their leader's defeat and their comrade's fall, began to mount back into the cover of the trees. Jedediah watched them recede, his body battered, his spirit drained. The skirmish was over, but the war remained. He knew Cain would return, it was his nature. But this time, Jedediah wasn't alone. Willa stood beside him, a woman who had conquered her personal demons and emerged stronger, a woman who had revealed that even in the deepest darkness, hope could take root. As he gazed at her, standing amidst the smoke and the wreckage, he knew they could confront whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Showdown and capture the morning sun, a molten coin in the sky, cast long shadows across the newly tilled earth. Willa, her brow damp with sweat, pressed another seed into the soil. Jedediah watched, a silent sentinel, leaning on his shovel. The garden, once a patch of stubborn weeds, was now a testament to their shared labor, a verdant promise amidst the harsh landscape. "It's coming along beautifully, Jedediah," Willa said, her voice laced with a gratitude that warmed him more than the sun. "Thank you." He simply nodded, unable to articulate the depth of his feelings. He'd spent years cultivating solitude, yet here he was, finding solace in shared work and quiet companionship. A horse's hooves, pounding against the dry earth, shattered the tranquility. Jedediah straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped against the cabin wall. Willa's face paled. "It's him," she whispered, her eyes wide with a fear he now recognized too well. "Cain." He dismounted, a coiled menace in worn leather, his gaze sweeping over the homestead. "Willa!" he bellowed, his voice grating against the morning air. Come on out, Willa. We need to have a little chat. Jedediah stepped forward, placing himself between Willa and Cain. She doesn't want to talk to you. Cain's lips curled into a sneer. This ain't your business, old man. Step aside. It is now, Jedediah replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Years of buried rage simmered beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. Cain spat on the ground. Fine, have it your way. He signaled to his men, who fanned out, surrounding the cabin. I want the ledger, Willa, and I want it now. Willa remained hidden behind Jedediah, her hand gripping his arm. He could feel her trembling, but her grip was firm. I don't have it, she called out, her voice stronger than he expected. Cain chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Don't play coy with me, Willa. I know you do. Your husband wasn't the brightest bulb, but he was smart enough to hide it with you. Jedediah had heard enough. He lunged forward, catching Cain off guard. The two men crashed to the ground, a tangle of limbs and fury. Jedediah, fueled by years of pent-up anger and a fierce protectiveness of Willa, fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. Cain, younger and stronger, countered with brutal efficiency. Blows rained down, each impact a grunt of pain. While the two men grappled, Willa acted. She knew she couldn't stand idly by. Jedediah, get him away from the horses, she yelled, then turned her attention to Cain's men. She knew this land better than they did. She'd spent weeks exploring its every contour, learning its secrets. It was time to put that knowledge to use. She led them away from the cabin, deeper into the surrounding scrubland. She feigned panic, stumbling and calling for help, drawing them further into her trap. Years ago, her husband had shown her a natural pit, cleverly disguised by a thick layer of brush and woven branches, originally intended for trapping wild animals. She had improved the design, reinforcing the netting and adding sharpened stakes at the bottom. Now, it would serve a different purpose. She darted behind a cluster of rocks, watching as the first two men rushed past, eager to capture her. She then kicked away the supporting branch. The brush gave way, and both men plummeted into the darkness, their screams swallowed by the earth. Willa quickly reset the trap, camouflaging it once more, then moved on, luring the remaining men further away. Back at the cabin, the fight between Jedediah and Cain had reached a fever pitch. Jedediah, bruised and bleeding, was beginning to tire. Cain, sensing his advantage, pressed his attack. He landed a blow to Jedediah's temple, sending him reeling. Cain raised his fist for the final strike, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Cain staggered, clutching his shoulder. He turned to see Willa standing a short distance away, rifle in hand. Her face was grim, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. Get away from him, she said, her voice steady, or the next shot will be for keeps. Cain, momentarily stunned, hesitated. He looked from Willa to Jedediah, his face contorted with rage. You'll pay for this, Willa, he snarled. You both will. He signaled to his remaining men, who were emerging from the scrubland, disheveled and empty-handed. Let's go! They mounted their horses and rode off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a lingering sense of dread. Willa rushed to Jedediah's side, kneeling beside him. Jedediah, are you all right? She asked, her voice filled with concern. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and admiration. I'm fine, he said, wincing as he sat up. Thanks to you. He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. You saved me. Willa squeezed his hand. "We saved each other," she said, her eyes meeting his. "We're in this together, Jedediah. Always." A future forged in fire, the rifle still smoked faintly in Willa's grip, the acrid scent mingling with the metallic tang of blood in the air. Cain lay groaning, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle beneath him. The fight bled out of him along with the crimson staining the dusty ground. Jedediah moved swiftly, not with rage this time, but with a grim efficiency. He bound Cain's wrists with rope, the coarse fibers biting into the man's skin. Willa watched him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "Is he?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Alive," Jedediah confirmed, his jaw tight. "He'll live to face a judge, at least." He glanced at the remaining members of Cain's gang, trussed and guarded by the townsfolk who had arrived, drawn by the sounds of gunfire. Their faces were a mixture of fear and defiant anger, but their fight was gone. Jedediah knew they were just small-time thugs, lured by Cain's promises of easy money. He felt a flicker of something akin to pity for them, trapped in a life they likely hadn't chosen. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the violence of the day before. Jedediah and Willa rode into town, leading the captured gang members. The sheriff, a portly man named Brody, looked relieved and grateful as he took custody of the prisoners. "You two did a real service to this county," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Cain's been a thorn in our side for too long." Willa simply nodded, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her. She wanted nothing more than to return to the quiet sanctuary of her ranch, to bury the memory of the violence and rebuild her life. Back at the ranch, Jedediah found Willa tending to her garden. The morning sun illuminated her face, highlighting the faint lines of worry that still etched her brow. He watched her for a moment, appreciating the quiet strength she possessed, the resilience that allowed her to face adversity head-on. He walked over to her, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. Willa looked up, a small smile gracing her lips. "I wouldn't say no. These tomatoes are getting heavy." Together, they worked in the garden, Jedediah lending his strength to build supports for the Leiden tomato plants, Willa carefully tending to the delicate blossoms. As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence settled between them, a silence filled with unspoken understanding and a growing sense of peace. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jedediah led Willa to a secluded spot overlooking the valley. A small fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on their faces. He had spread a blanket on the ground, and a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables was laid out. Willa looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What's all this?" she asked softly. Jedediah took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been one for grand gestures or flowery speeches, but he knew he had to speak from the heart. "Willa," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "since you came into my life, everything has changed. You show me that it's possible to love again, to heal from the past. I know I'm not an easy man, but I promise to spend the rest of my days trying to be the man you deserve." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. He opened it, revealing a simple gold band. It wasn't fancy or extravagant, but it was solid and enduring, much like the love he felt for her. "Willa Nash," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled up in Willa's eyes, blurring her vision. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Jedediah," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You've given me a reason to believe in happiness again, to believe in a future." "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the gold gleaming in the firelight. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and they stood there for a long moment, embraced in the silence of the night, their hearts filled with a love that had been forged in fire and tempered by adversity. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to the small community. Jedediah and Willa worked tirelessly, expanding their ranches, building new fences, and planting crops. They were a team, their strengths complementing each other, their love growing stronger with each passing day. The townsfolk, initially wary of Willa's arrival, had come to accept her, recognizing her strength and her willingness to contribute to the community. She became known for her healing touch, her knowledge of herbs and remedies proving invaluable to those in need. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Jedediah's ranch, watching the sunset, Willa leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," she said softly. "After everything that happened." Jedediah tightened his arm around her. "You deserve to be happy, Willa," he said. "We both do. We've earned it." He looked out at the valley, at the rolling hills and the vast expanse of sky. "This is our home now," he said, "our future. And we'll face it together, no matter what comes our way." The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. Jedediah pointed to a particularly bright star, shimmering above the horizon. "That's Venus," he said. "The evening, star. It's a symbol of hope and new beginnings." Willa looked at the star, her heart filled with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She knew that their journey wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face anything. She looked at Jedediah, his face etched with a quiet determination, his eyes filled with love. She knew that she had found her home, her family, her future, in the arms of this broken rancher who had mended her heart. And as they sat there, under the starlit sky, they knew that their future was forged in fire, a future filled with love, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and the promise of a life well lived.